In this video, I'm going to start telling you a little bit more about Web3 and how it works internally. You'll recall that I just said that we spelt this variable right here specifically with a capital W because it was a constructor function. Whenever we make use of Web3, we have the constructor function and we use this to make instances of the Web3 library. We can make multiple instances inside of one project. The purpose of each instance is to connect to a different Ethereum network. Now, it's relatively uncommon for us to want to access multiple networks from one application. So personally, I really expect that in general, you're only ever going to be working with one instance of Web3 at a time. With that in mind, let's take a look at a diagram that gives us a better idea of how Web3 is organized. So right here at the top, we have the Web3 constructor function. So this is what you and I just required into that inbox test file. We're going to use the constructor to make an instance of Web3. Whenever we make an instance of Web3, we have to immediately do some configuration of the new instance that we have created. And in particular, we have to set up something called a provider. A provider can be thought of as like a communication layer between the Web3 library and some specific Ethereum network. So the provider right here, this is a communication layer. Every provider that we ever make use of for connecting to different networks has an identical set of methods on it. These different methods allow the Web3 library to essentially send a request over to a local network and to receive a response to that request. You should really think of the provider right here as being like a telephone or a cell phone, and Web3 and Ganache as being like two people who are trying to communicate. So this might be me standing right here. Maybe I'm a copy of Web3. Maybe you are a copy of Ganache. Sorry that you had such a lot in life. And we might use this provider as a communication means to exchange messages with each other. Of course, Web3 is always going to be connecting to or talking to, communicating with some Ethereum network. So Web3 is always going to expect you to provide a provider. If you don't provide a provider, Web3 is going to complain and it's going to say, hey, I have no idea what network I'm supposed to be talking to here. Now, I specifically drew this kind of little notch in the diagram right here so that you can kind of understand that we're going to take this Web3 instance and we're going to kind of plug in a provider like so. In this case, the provider is coming from this local test network that you and I are putting together, but we could easily swap this provider right here out and replace it with some other provider that speaks to a different network. So these are exchangeable providers. But again, in general, you and I are only ever going to be working with one network at a time. All right, so now that we've got a better sense of what's going on in the provider, let's flip back over to our code and we're going to set up our local instance of Web3. So back inside my code editor, I'm going to create an instance of Web3 by saying lowercase Web3. So again, notice that the capitalization of the first letter indicates whether we are working with the constructor or the instance. So lowercase means instance. We'll then say new Web3. In this case, this is the constructor function, so we're using the capital here. And then to the constructor function, we're going to provide ganache.provider, like so. So this line of code right here is what creates an instance of Web3 and tells that instance to attempt to connect to this local test network that we are hosting on our machine solely for the purpose of running these tests. In the future, when we start to connect to other networks, like say the xbte test network or the main network, we will replace this provider with a different provider that will link us up to those other networks that we want to access. So again, this first argument right here is going to change over time depending on what network we are attempting to connect to. All right, I know that was a lot of discussion for just one line of code, but this provider thing is going to really haunt us. That's really the best term I can come up with. The idea of a provider is going to haunt us over time, especially as we start using MetaMask to interact with our applications in the browser. So this topic is going to come back up in a really big way later on in the course. All right, let's pause right now. And in the next section, we're going to get a better sense of how we can use Ganache and Mocha to write tests around our contract. So I'll see you in a minute.